A corrupt police officer stood on a quiet street holding $5,000. He just took the money from a quiet man driving an old truck. Then, he locked the man's German Shepherd in a dark van to sell for profit. The officer smiled, feeling completely untouchable. He thought the man was just a helpless drifter with no voice and no power. But he made a terrible mistake. The man in the handcuffs was actually an active-duty Navy SEAL. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The steady hum of truck tires against cracked asphalt filled the cabin. Outside the window, the endless stretches of flat American plains blurred past. Luke kept one hand loosely draped over the steering wheel. He was in his early 30s, a man built out of hard angles and quiet discipline. His military buzz cut left his dark hair cropped close to his scalp, highlighting a sharp jawline and watchful eyes. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad shoulders and faded jeans. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL on a rare leave, finally getting a chance to breathe the open air. Sitting in the passenger seat was Duke. Duke was a massive, purebred German Shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and sharp amber eyes that missed nothing. Around his thick neck rested a heavy tactical collar, woven from military-grade nylon and equipped with a heavy metal buckle. Duke sat tall, his ears perked up, watching the road with the same intense focus as his owner. Luke reached over and rubbed the space between the dog's ears. Duke leaned into the touch, letting out a low rumble of contentment. The bond between them needed no words. They moved in sync, a team forged through shared quiet moments and unspoken trust. "We are making good time, buddy," Luke said. His voice was calm, deep, and steady over the roar of the engine. "We will reach the state capital by tomorrow morning. We cannot be late for this one." Duke offered a soft bark in response, resting his heavy chin on the center console. Luke smiled faintly. He had a vital appointment in Columbus, Ohio. It was not just a meeting. It was an honor, a recognition of things done in the dark corners of the world. He had promised his commanding officers he would stand on that stage on time. Luke never broke a promise. The landscape outside began to shift. The open fields gave way to concrete structures and towering steel smokestacks that clawed at a gray, overcast sky. The road sign ahead read, "Welcome to Oakhaven." Oakhaven was a relic. It was a dying industrial town that time and progress had left behind to rust. Luke downshifted as the truck rolled past the town limits. The air coming through the cracked window smelled of old metal, engine oil, and damp earth. Rows of abandoned warehouses lined the street, their windows shattered like broken teeth. Weeds pushed aggressively through the cracked pavement, reclaiming the forgotten roads. A heavy, oppressive silence hung over the town. There were no children playing in the front yards. There were no cars parked outside the faded diners. The few people Luke saw walking along the crumbling sidewalks kept their heads down, their shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. They moved quickly, strictly avoiding eye contact with the main road. Luke felt a familiar prickle at the back of his neck. It was the exact same instinct that kept him alive in overseas combat zones. The quiet here felt wrong. It was not the peaceful quiet of the countryside. It was the tense, breathless quiet of a place holding its breath in fear. Duke felt it too. The German Shepherd lifted his head from the center console. His ears swiveled backward, and his powerful muscles tensed under his dark coat. A low, barely audible growl vibrated deep in the dog's throat. "Easy, Duke," Luke commanded softly. "We are just passing through. We will get gas on the other side of town and get back on the highway." Luke kept his eyes firmly on the road, maintaining the exact speed limit. He drove a modest, slightly battered Ford pickup. It did not stand out, which was exactly how he preferred it. He wanted no trouble. He just wanted to clear the town borders and put Oakhaven behind him forever. They approached a four-way intersection. The traffic light dangled from a rusted wire, flashing a steady yellow. Luke slowed the truck, checking both directions carefully. The cross streets were entirely empty, flanked by boarded-up storefronts and a derelict gas station covered in faded graffiti. He pressed the accelerator, smoothly guiding the truck through the intersection. He checked his rearview mirror. The street behind him was perfectly clear. Then, the world exploded in red and blue light. A police cruiser tore out from a narrow, shadowed alleyway hidden behind the abandoned gas station. The cruiser's tires squealed violently against the pavement as it swung into the street, completely ignoring all traffic laws. It accelerated with shocking speed, closing the distance to Luke's truck in a matter of seconds. The piercing shriek of the police siren shattered the dead silence of Oakhaven. The noise bounced off the empty brick buildings, amplifying into a deafening wail. Luke checked his speedometer immediately. He was going exactly 25 miles per hour in a 25 zone. Both of his hands gripped the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. He had used his turn signals. His registration tags were current. There was absolutely no legal reason for a traffic stop. The police cruiser surged forward, riding inches from the rear bumper of Luke's truck. The aggressive tailgating was a deliberate provocation. The high beams flashed blindingly in Luke's mirrors, flooding the truck cabin with harsh, erratic light. Duke barked sharply, standing up on the passenger seat and turning to face the rear window. The dog's hackles raised in a stiff ridge along his spine. He recognized a clear threat. "Sit," Luke ordered sharply. Duke obeyed instantly, dropping his weight back onto the seat, but his amber eyes remained locked on the flashing lights behind them. Luke took a slow, deep breath. He suppressed the combat instincts, urging him to evade an aggressive pursuer. He was a citizen on domestic soil. He tapped his brakes, signaling his compliance, and guided his truck toward the cracked curb. The gravel crunched loudly under his tires as he brought the vehicle to a complete stop next to a crumbling brick wall. The police cruiser jerked to a halt directly behind him, boxing him in. The siren cut off abruptly, leaving behind a ringing silence, but the red and blue lights continued to slash through the gloomy afternoon air. Luke put the truck in park and turned off the engine. He rolled down his window all the way and placed both of his hands clearly on top of the steering wheel. He waited in the flashing shadows, unaware that the darkest part of his journey had just begun. The first man to approach the driver's side was Sergeant Briggs. Briggs was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, carrying a thick layer of fat around his middle that visibly strained his uniform belt. His dark uniform looked unwashed, and a cold, arrogant smirk twisted his lips. Behind him stood Officer Miller. Miller was much younger, tall and painfully thin, with nervous eyes that darted constantly around the empty street. He kept his right hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered sidearm. Briggs walked with a slow, exaggerated swagger. He stopped just behind the driver's side door, intentionally staying in Luke's blind spot. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make the driver feel vulnerable. He tapped his heavy metal flashlight against the truck's bed, creating a loud, sharp crack that echoed down the quiet, abandoned street. Inside the cabin, Duke reacted instantly. The massive German Shepherd lunged toward the driver's side window. A deep, resonant growl erupted from his chest, vibrating through the truck seats. Duke bared his white teeth, sensing the aggressive posture and ill intent of the men outside. "Quiet, Duke." "Down," Luke commanded. His voice held absolute authority, leaving no room for negotiation. Duke snapped his jaws shut, lowering his heavy body back to the passenger seat. However, his amber eyes remained fixed on Briggs. The dog's muscles stayed tightly coiled, ready to spring at the slightest provocation. Briggs finally stepped up to the open window. He leaned in, invading Luke's personal space. The sergeant smelled strongly of stale coffee, old sweat, and cheap tobacco. He shined his bright flashlight directly into Luke's eyes, trying to force the driver to look away. Luke did not flinch. He blinked once, allowing his vision to adjust to the blinding glare, and stared right back at the sergeant. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Briggs demanded. He did not say hello. He did not give a reason for the traffic stop. His tone dripped with absolute contempt. "Good afternoon, officer," Luke said. He kept his voice perfectly level, relying on years of strict military discipline to mask his rising irritation. "Can you tell me why I was pulled over?" Briggs leaned closer, resting his forearm on the edge of the window. "You failed to maintain your lane back at the intersection. You were swerving all over the road. Now, hand over the papers before I decide to pull you out through this window." It was a blatant lie. Luke had driven perfectly straight, maintaining a flawless trajectory. He knew the tactic well. These corrupt cops were fishing for a reaction. They wanted him to argue. They wanted an excuse to escalate the situation and use force. Luke refused to give them one. He had a tight schedule to keep. He needed to be at the state capitol tomorrow morning. "My wallet is in my right back pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment," Luke stated calmly. "I am going to reach for them now, slowly." "Make it real slow, boy," Briggs sneered. Luke moved with deliberate, telegraphed slowness. He retrieved his wallet, opened it, and extracted his driver's license. Then he leaned over to the glove box, clicked it open, and pulled out his vehicle registration and insurance card. He handed the neat stack of documents to Briggs. Briggs snatched the papers away. He scanned the license. "Virginia plates. You are a long way from home. What brings you to Oakhaven?" "I am just passing through," Luke answered shortly. "Heading to Columbus, 'tis." While Briggs examined the documents, Officer Miller stepped up to the passenger side window. He peered into the truck bed, then shined his flashlight into the cab. The beam swept over Duke, who let out another low, vibrating warning growl. Then the light illuminated the back seat. Luke had his heavy tactical duffel bag resting there, alongside a high-end, waterproof protective case carrying his specialized gear. The equipment was expensive, durable, and clearly military-grade. Miller's eyes widened with greed. He tapped the roof of the truck twice and signaled to his partner. Briggs shifted his gaze to the back seat, noticing the expensive bags. A greedy glint appeared in his dark eyes. "You have a lot of nice expensive gear back there for a guy driving a beat-up Ford," Briggs noted, his voice turning suspicious. "How do you afford all that?" "I am in the military," Luke replied calmly. "That is my personal issued equipment." Briggs scoffed loudly. "Military? You do not look like a soldier to me. You look like a homeless drifter." "I am an active-duty Navy SEAL," Luke corrected him smoothly, keeping his posture relaxed. "My military identification card is right behind my driver's license in your hand." Briggs thumbed through the cards and pulled out the solid white common access card. It bore Luke's official photo, his rank, and the Department of Defense seal. It was undeniable proof of his identity and his service. Any decent police officer would recognize it immediately and likely offer a nod of respect. Briggs looked at the ID. Then he looked at Luke. The smirk on his face widened into a cruel, mocking grin. He held the military ID up between his thick fingers. "You expect me to believe this piece of plastic?" Briggs asked, laughing harshly. "A Navy SEAL? In my town? Driving this piece of junk? I know a fake ID when I see one." "It is a federal identification card," Luke said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "You can run the numbers through your dispatch to verify it." "I do not need dispatch to tell me you are a liar," Briggs declared loudly. With a flick of his wrist, Briggs tossed the military ID card onto the dirty pavement. The plastic card bounced against the asphalt and landed face down near the curb. Luke tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His knuckles turned stark white. Disrespecting the uniform, disrespecting the service, it was a deliberate, calculated insult meant to break his composure. "Pick that up," Luke said. The calmness in his voice vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, hard, and dangerous edge. Briggs stepped back from the window quickly. His hand dropped to his duty belt. He unsnapped his holster with a loud click. "Step out of the vehicle," Briggs shouted, his voice echoing sharply off the abandoned brick buildings. "Step out of the vehicle right now." Officer Miller drew his weapon simultaneously on the passenger side, aiming the barrel directly through the glass at Luke's head. Miller's hands were shaking slightly. Duke erupted into a frenzy of furious barking, throwing his massive body against the passenger door, desperately trying to get to the man threatening his owner. The truck shook with the dog's sheer power. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Briggs yelled, pulling his own pistol and pointing it squarely at Luke's chest. "Open the door from the outside and get out. Do it now." Luke looked at the two drawn weapons. His mind shifted instantly into combat mode. He calculated the angles, the reaction times of the officers, and the immediate risk to Duke. He knew he could disarm Briggs in less than 2 seconds, but Miller had the drop on him from the other side. A shootout here would ruin everything. It would mean missing the ceremony in Columbus. More importantly, it would mean risking Duke's life. Luke raised his hand slowly, keeping his palms open and entirely visible. He unbuckled his seatbelt with his left hand, reached outside the window, and pulled the exterior door handle. He stepped out into the humid air of Oak Haven, stepping right into the rusting trap these corrupt cops had laid out for him. The humid air of Oak Haven felt heavy as Luke stood beside his truck. He kept his hands raised clearly in the air, his palms open. Officer Miller stood a few paces away, his pistol pointed directly at Luke's chest. Miller breathed rapidly, his eyes wide and nervous. He gripped the weapon tightly, his knuckles turning white under the flashing police lights. Luke recognized the danger immediately. A nervous man with a gun was far more dangerous than a trained professional. "Do not move a single muscle," Miller instructed, his voice cracking slightly in the quiet street. Luke kept his focus on Miller, analyzing the young officer's stance. His military training evaluated the threat constantly. Luke knew he could close the distance, disarm the officer, and secure the weapon in under 2 seconds. He had executed similar maneuvers in active combat zones. However, attacking a police officer on domestic soil would ruin everything. It would lead to a massive manhunt, jail time, and an immediate end to his military career. Most importantly, it would force him to miss the crucial ceremony in Columbus tomorrow morning. He needed to receive the Navy Cross on behalf of his fallen brothers. He chose patience. Sergeant Briggs did not ask for consent to search the vehicle. He walked aggressively to the open driver's side door, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it completely open. Briggs leaned his bulky frame into the truck cab. Duke reacted instantly. The massive German Shepherd let out a ferocious bark, standing tall on the passenger seat. The dog bared his sharp white teeth, warning the intruder to stay back. The truck shook with the dog's sheer power. "Keep that aggressive mutt quiet, or I will shoot him right here," Briggs yelled, pulling his hand away from the center console quickly. "Duke, stay," Luke commanded. His voice cut through the tension with absolute authority. Duke stopped barking immediately. He dropped his weight back onto the seat. However, he maintained a low, continuous growl. His amber eyes tracked Briggs's every movement, ready to defend his owner if necessary. Briggs snorted and continued his illegal search. He ripped papers out of the glove compartment and tossed them onto the floorboards. He tore the seat covers and checked under the floor mats. Finding nothing in the front, he moved to the back seat. He grabbed Luke's heavy canvas duffel bag and dragged it violently out of the truck. The bag hit the dirty asphalt with a loud thud. Briggs unzipped the bag and began pulling out Luke's personal items. He threw folded shirts, a shaving kit, and a pair of combat boots onto the ground, kicking them aside with his foot. He dug deeper into the bag until his thick fingers found a smaller, hidden, zippered pouch tucked into the bottom lining. A greedy smile spread across the sergeant's face. He opened the pouch and pulled out neatly banded stacks of $100 bills. It was a significant amount of cash. Luke had saved this money over months of overseas deployment. He preferred carrying cash for his long cross-country road trips, avoiding the need to stop at banks or leave a digital trail of his travels. Briggs flipped the edges of the bills with his thumb, listening to the crisp sound of the paper. "Well, look what we have found," Briggs mocked, holding the money up in the air. A fake soldier driving a rusty truck, carrying thousands of dollars in undeclared cash. "That is my personal savings," Luke stated firmly, keeping his hands raised. "I am traveling across the country. That money is for gas, food, and emergencies. It is completely legal." Briggs laughed loudly, turning to look at his nervous partner. "Did you hear that, Miller? The drifter claims the money is legal. I say it looks exactly like the illegal proceeds of a narcotics operation." "You have no probable cause," Luke said. His voice dropped lower, carrying a sharp, dangerous edge. "You found no drugs. You found no contraband. You are making a terrible mistake. I am the law in this town." Briggs spat back, stepping closer to Luke. "And the local law says I can seize any assets suspected of being tied to criminal activity. It is called civil asset forfeiture. We do not need to charge you with a crime to take it. You can file a claim with the county court next month if you want it back. Good luck affording a lawyer." Briggs shoved the thick stacks of cash into his uniform pockets. He did not write a receipt. He did not record the amount in a logbook. It was a brazen, daylight robbery conducted under the protection of a silver badge. Luke watched the theft happen right in front of him. His muscles coiled tight. He swallowed his anger, forcing himself to look at the rusting buildings instead of the corrupt cop. "Fine," Luke said coldly. "Take the money. Write your fake report. Just let me and my dog get back in the truck and leave." Briggs ignored the request. He turned his attention back to the open truck door. He stared intently at Duke. He noticed the dog's impressive size, the flawless obedience, and the expensive military-grade tactical collar around his neck. "That is a mighty fine animal," Briggs noted. A darker, more lucrative scheme formed in his mind. "He is purebred. He is highly trained. He did not attack me when I searched the car. He only barked. That takes extreme discipline." "He is a retired military working dog," Luke warned, feeling a sudden spike of real panic. "He is my responsibility. Leave him completely out of this." "A dog like that is worth a fortune," Briggs muttered, calculating the profit. "Private security contractors down south pay top dollar for trained attack dogs. They pay in cash. They do not ask questions about where the dogs come from." Luke took half a step forward, his combat instincts flaring hot. "Do not touch my dog." Miller immediately raised his gun higher, aiming squarely at Luke's head. "Step back," I said. "Step back right now." "The dog is a valuable asset," Briggs declared loudly, pointing a thick finger at Duke. "He was located in a vehicle used to transport suspected drug money. That makes the animal subject to civil seizure, exactly like the cash." "You cannot do this," Luke warned. His voice shook with suppressed, violent rage. "You take that money, you will face severe consequences. You take my dog, you will regret it for the rest of your life." Briggs walked right up to Luke, smiling cruelly. He felt invincible in his quiet, forgotten town. "Miller, call dispatch. Tell them to send the animal control van down here immediately. We have a vicious dog that needs to be impounded." Luke stared at Briggs. His eyes turned as cold as ice. The trap had closed completely. These men had just crossed a line they could never, ever uncross. Officer Miller hesitated for only a fraction of a second before keying the radio microphone attached to his shoulder. His voice trembled slightly as he relayed the request. He kept his pistol firmly leveled at Luke, clearly terrified of the calm, silent man standing before him. Luke did not move. He kept his hands raised high in the humid Oakhaven air. His mind processed every variable in the environment. He noted the distance between himself and Miller. He saw the exact angle of Briggs's body. He knew he possessed the lethal skills to drop both men to the pavement before they could pull their triggers. But he also knew the catastrophic consequences of that action. A physical assault on law enforcement would trigger a statewide manhunt. It would bring shame to his unit and strip him of his military career. Most importantly, it would put Duke directly in the line of fire. "Turn around," Briggs commanded sharply. He holstered his weapon and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his duty belt. "Put your hands behind your back." Luke slowly lowered his arms and turned his back to the corrupt sergeant. He offered his wrists without a word of protest. Briggs grabbed Luke's arms aggressively, twisting them higher than necessary in a petty display of dominance. The cold steel cuffs snapped shut around Luke's wrists. Briggs tightened the metal ratchets until they bit painfully into Luke's skin, cutting off the circulation. "Not so tough now, are you?" Briggs mocked, shoving Luke forcefully against the side of the police cruiser. The hot metal of the car burned through Luke's thin black shirt. Inside the truck, Duke went absolutely frantic. The German Shepherd threw his heavy body against the glass window, barking with a ferocity that shook the vehicle. The dog saw his master being assaulted, and his protective instincts took complete control. White foam gathered at the edges of Duke's mouth. His amber eyes burned with raw, protective fury. "Shut that dog up!" Miller yelled, taking a nervous step backward as Duke's heavy paws slammed against the truck window. "Let him bark," Briggs laughed, checking his watch. "He is just increasing his own price tag." 10 agonizing minutes passed in the sweltering heat. Luke stood pinned against the cruiser, completely silent. He refused to give Briggs the satisfaction of a reaction. Finally, a rusted white van rattled down the empty street. The words, "Oakhaven Animal Control," were barely visible under a layer of thick brown dirt on the side panels. The van screeched to a halt behind the police cruiser. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. His name tag read Gary. Gary was a scruffy man in his late 50s, wearing a stained gray uniform shirt and heavy leather gloves. He looked tired and entirely indifferent to the situation. He walked to the back of his van, opened the double doors, and pulled out a long, heavy metal catch pole with a thick wire loop at the end. "Got a vicious one for me, Briggs?" Gary asked, spitting a wad of chewing tobacco onto the cracked pavement. "Sure do, Gary," Briggs replied cheerfully. "He is sitting in that Ford, purebred German Shepherd. I need him impounded securely. Do not damage him. He is valuable property." Gary grunted and walked slowly toward Luke's truck. As he approached the passenger door, Duke's barking turned into a deep, guttural roar. The dog bared his teeth, ready to tear apart anyone who tried to breach the cabin. Gary stopped a few feet away, holding the metal catchpole out in front of him. He looked at Briggs and shook his head. "I am not opening that door, Sergeant. That animal will rip my throat out before I can get the loop around his neck." Briggs cursed loudly. He drew his pistol again and marched directly toward the passenger side of the truck. He aimed the barrel of his gun squarely at Duke's head, through the glass. "Listen to me, Drifter," Briggs shouted over the deafening barks. "You are going to tell your mutt to calm down and submit. If he snaps at Gary, if he even tries to fight back, I will put a bullet right between his eyes. Do you understand me?" Luke's heart hammered against his ribs. A cold wave of dread washed over him. He looked at the gun aimed at his best friend. He knew Briggs was entirely capable of pulling the trigger out of pure spite. Luke had to make the most painful choice of his life. He had to break his own dog's protective spirit to save his life. "Duke!" Luke shouted, his voice cracked like a whip in the heavy air. Duke paused, turning his head to look at his master. The dog whined, a confused and heartbroken sound. He did not understand why his master was surrendering. "Stand down, Duke. Yield," Luke commanded. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Duke's ears flattened against his skull. The fierce light in his amber eyes dimmed. Years of strict military training overrode his natural instincts. With a low, miserable whimper, the massive German Shepherd lowered his body back onto the seat. He tucked his tail between his legs and stopped growling. "Good," Briggs sneered. "Open the door, Gary. Get him." Gary stepped forward and cautiously pulled the door handle. Duke did not move. He kept his eyes locked on Luke, begging for a different command. Gary slipped the heavy wire loop over Duke's head and pulled it tight around his thick neck. Duke choked slightly, but offered zero resistance. Gary dragged the heavy dog out of the truck and across the hot asphalt. Luke watched in silent agony as Gary forced Duke into a small, dark metal cage in the back of the rusted van. The cage door slammed shut with a harsh metallic clang. Gary slid a heavy padlock into place. "Good work," Briggs said, walking back to Luke. The sergeant grabbed Luke by the collar of his shirt and shoved him violently toward the open back door of the police cruiser. Luke hit his shoulder hard against the door frame, but he did not make a sound. He climbed into the cramped plastic back seat. The air inside the cruiser smelled of stale sweat and old vomit. Briggs slammed the cruiser door shut, trapping Luke inside. Through the thick wire mesh and dirty glass, Luke watched the animal control van shift into gear. The white van pulled away from the curb, carrying Duke down the empty street until it disappeared around a crumbling brick corner. A moment later, the police cruiser lurched forward in the opposite direction. They were heading toward the local police station. Luke sat perfectly still in the back seat. His hands were bound tightly behind his back. His money was gone. His best friend was gone. But as he stared at the back of Sergeant Briggs's head, the cold dread in his chest vanished. It was replaced by a quiet, calculating, and terrifying focus. They had made their move. Soon, the military would make theirs. The drive to the Oak Haven police station took less than 10 minutes. The building looked exactly like the rest of the decaying town. It was a square, gray concrete block with heavy iron bars on the windows and a cracking stone foundation. Sergeant Briggs dragged Luke out of the cruiser and forced him through the heavy glass front doors. Inside the station, the air conditioning system rattled loudly. It blew warm air that smelled of stale sweat, cheap floor wax, and old cigarette smoke. Officer Miller followed closely behind them, carrying Luke's canvas duffel bag and the thick stacks of stolen cash hidden in his uniform pockets. Behind the elevated front desk sat Officer Evans. Evans was a pale, overweight man in a rumpled blue uniform. He chewed on a piece of gum with his mouth open. He barely looked up from his glowing computer monitor as Briggs shoved Luke toward the processing area. "Got a live one today, Sergeant?" Evans asked, popping his gum. "Just a drifter causing trouble on my highway," Briggs replied. His voice held a proud, arrogant tone. "Book him for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and suspected drug trafficking. Put him in holding cell number 3. Evans clicked his computer mouse a few times and nodded. He did not ask for Luke's name. He did not ask to see an incident report or demand a legal reason for the arrest. The corruption in the station operated like a routine, well-oiled machine. Briggs pushed Luke down a short, dimly lit hallway. The floor tiles were chipped and stained dark with years of grime. Briggs stopped at a heavy iron door, unlocked it with a large key, and pushed it open. He shoved Luke hard in the center of his back. Luke stumbled forward into the cell, but quickly regained his perfect balance. The holding cell was a miserable concrete box. A single fluorescent bulb flickered on the ceiling. It cast harsh, moving shadows across the cinder block walls. A stained stainless steel toilet sat in the far corner. It emitted a foul, sour odor of rust and old urine. A flat concrete bench attached to the wall served as the only piece of furniture. The bars on the door were thick steel, coated in layers of peeling gray paint. Briggs stepped into the cell and unlocked Luke's handcuffs. Luke rubbed his bruised wrists slowly. The metal had cut deep into his skin, leaving angry red marks. He kept his face completely blank. "I have the right to make a legal phone call," Luke stated clearly. His deep voice echoed off the hard concrete walls. Briggs laughed, stepping back out of the cell and turning the heavy metal key in the lock. The door clicked shut with a loud sound of locking steel. "You do not have any rights in my jail, boy," Briggs sneered through the iron bars. "The phones are mysteriously down today. Maybe they will work tomorrow, maybe next week. Sit down, shut your mouth, and keep quiet." Briggs walked back down the hallway, leaving Luke entirely alone. The specific layout of the station allowed Luke to hear and see small parts of the main office through a reflective hallway mirror. He sat down on the cold concrete bench. He did not panic. He applied his rigorous Navy SEAL training directly to the situation. He controlled his breathing. He took slow, deep inhales through his nose and exhaled quietly through his mouth. He slowed his heart rate. He gathered crucial intelligence from his surroundings. In the main office, Briggs and Miller sat at a cluttered metal desk. They did not even try to hide their illegal actions. Miller unzipped Luke's pouch and dumped the banded stacks of $100 bills onto the table. The sight of the massive amount of money made both men smile with raw, unfiltered greed. "Count it right now," Briggs ordered. Miller licked his thumb and flipped rapidly through the bills. The crisp sound of the paper traveled clearly down the quiet hallway. Luke listened to them count his hard-earned deployment savings. "Looks like exactly $5,000, Miller whispered, his eyes wide. "This is a massive haul, Sergeant. We hit the jackpot today." "Split it right down the middle," Briggs commanded, tapping the desk. $2,500 for you, $2,500 for me. We will leave $200 in the official evidence locker to make the paperwork look legitimate." Miller nodded eagerly. He stuffed the thick wads of cash deep into his uniform pockets. Luke felt a cold, dangerous anger burning in his chest, but he kept his face completely emotionless. The money did not matter anymore. He could earn the money back. His only real concern was Duke. Briggs picked up the desk phone and dialed a local number from memory. He leaned back in his chair, putting his heavy black boots up on the desk. "Hey, Marcus," Briggs spoke into the receiver. "It is Briggs down at the Oakhaven station. I have something you definitely want. A purebred German Shepherd. Massive size, fully trained, highly disciplined. A real military-grade animal." Luke tightened his jaw until his teeth ached. Marcus was obviously a black market dealer or a private security contractor who regularly bought stolen dogs from the corrupt police. "Yes, he is healthy," Briggs continued, laughing softly into the phone. "I just locked his owner up in the back. He is not going anywhere for a long time. I need $3,000 in cash for this animal. You can pick him up tonight at the county impound lot. Bring a heavy cage." Briggs paused, listening carefully to the voice on the other end. "Good. See you tonight, Marcus," Briggs said. He hung up the phone with a loud click. The sergeant looked at Miller with a triumphant grin. "Another $3,000 coming in tonight. This drifter is the best thing that ever drove through our miserable town." Luke heard every single word of the conversation. The threat to Duke was now immediate. The dog would be sold and shipped away permanently by nightfall. Luke looked up at the wall clock hanging above the hallway door. The plastic face was yellowed and cracked, but the black hands moved steadily forward. The clock read exactly 8:30 in the morning. His crucial ceremony at the state capitol in Columbus was scheduled to begin at exactly 9 o'clock. The governor of Ohio, a high-ranking Navy admiral, and hundreds of distinguished guests would be waiting in the Grand Hall. They would expect him to walk proudly onto the stage in his dress uniform and receive the Navy Cross. The United States military operates on strict, uncompromising precision. Being 5 minutes late was considered a failure. Missing an event of this magnitude was impossible. Luke watched the second hand tick relentlessly around the clock face. The rhythmic ticking matched his steady, calm heartbeat. He did not yell for help. He did not pound his fists against the iron bars. He simply waited in the freezing cold silence of the concrete cell. The corrupt police officers in the outer office continued to laugh. They drank stale coffee and joked about their newly acquired wealth. They felt completely untouchable. They believed they ruled Oakhaven with total impunity. They truly believed they had just successfully robbed a helpless, nameless drifter. Luke watched the clock finally strike 9. The ultimate deadline passed. In that exact moment, Luke knew the massive gears of the military machine had officially begun to turn. He knew the admiral would look at the empty chair on the stage and demand immediate answers. He knew the military intelligence officers would start making urgent calls and tracking his last known location. The corrupt police officers in the outer room continued to laugh, completely unaware of the changing reality. Their arrogant ignorance had just ignited a devastating fuse. The clock kept ticking, and the storm was already gathering rapidly on the horizon. The grand rotunda of the Ohio State House gleamed under the morning sun. Giant marble pillars stretched toward a magnificent painted ceiling. Massive American flags hung from the balconies, perfectly still in the quiet air. Rows of wooden chairs filled the expansive floor, occupied by hundreds of distinguished guests. Politicians in dark suits sat next to military officers in crisp, formal uniforms. They all gathered for one specific purpose. They came to witness the awarding of the Navy Cross. Admiral Thomas Vance stood near the heavy wooden podium. He wore his pristine dress white uniform. 4 silver stars shone brightly on his shoulders. His chest displayed rows of colorful ribbons, each telling a story of combat and survival. He held a small velvet-lined box in his hands. Inside rested the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Vance looked at the front row. The designated seat of honor remained entirely empty. The heavy brass pendulum of the grandfather clock in the corner swung back and forth. The clock struck 9 times. The loud chimes echoed through the cavernous hall. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People checked their watches. They whispered to their neighbors. A delay at an event of this magnitude was highly unusual. Admiral Vance did not whisper. He stared at the empty chair with narrowed eyes. He knew Luke personally. He commanded Luke during 3 brutal combat tours overseas. He knew the young Navy SEAL possessed an unbreakable sense of duty. Luke operated with absolute precision. He treated time with extreme respect. Most importantly, Luke viewed this medal not as a personal victory, but as a sacred tribute to the teammates he lost in battle. Luke would never skip this ceremony. He would never arrive late. He would walk through fire to stand on this stage. A cold, sharp instinct flared in the Admiral's mind. It was the same combat instinct that warned him of enemy ambushes years ago. Something was terribly wrong. This was not a flat tire. This was not a traffic jam. His soldier was in grave danger. Vance did not hesitate. He handed the velvet box to a nervous aide standing nearby. "Hold this," Vance ordered quietly. "Keep the crowd calm. Do not start the ceremony." Vance stepped off the stage and walked purposefully down a side corridor. He entered a secure, soundproof holding room located behind the main hall. Captain Hayes, a senior Navy intelligence officer, stood up immediately and saluted. Hayes wore a dark blue uniform and operated a secure military laptop on a small desk. "Captain," Vance said, skipping the formalities, "we have a critical situation. Luke is missing. Locate him right now." Hayes sat back down and let his fingers fly across the keyboard. He accessed the Federal cellular grid. He punched in Luke's phone number. Lines of green code scrolled rapidly down the black screen. "I am pinging his mobile device, Admiral," Hayes reported, staring intensely at the monitor. "The signal is completely dead. The network shows the phone lost power or suffered physical destruction exactly 2 hours ago." "Where was the last recorded ping?" Vance demanded. "A rural cell tower in eastern Ohio," Hayes answered, "near a declining industrial town called Oak Haven." Vance crossed his arms over his chest. His jaw tightened. A missing special operator in a remote domestic location required an immediate, aggressive response. He would not rely on local authorities to investigate. He trusted his own network. "Track the dog," Vance commanded. Hayes looked up, slightly surprised, but he nodded quickly. Nobody outside of the Special Operations Command knew the truth about Duke. The massive German Shepherd was far more than a loyal pet. He was a highly classified military asset. Before Duke retired from active duty, military technicians implanted a specialized microchip deep under the skin of his neck. Additionally, his heavy tactical collar contained a dormant military-grade GPS transmitter. The military designed the system to track K-9 units lost behind enemy lines. The tracker remained silent to avoid detection. It required a direct, encrypted satellite override from a secure command center to wake up. "Initiating the override sequence now," Hayes said. He typed a long string of classified authorization codes into the system. He routed the signal through a secure military satellite orbiting miles above the Earth, sending the wake-up ping to the collar. Silence filled the small room. The laptop screen displayed a digital map of the United States. A scanning radar swept across the screen in slow green circles. 10 seconds passed, then 20 seconds. Suddenly, the laptop emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep. A bright red dot appeared on the screen. It blinked rapidly, establishing a solid, unbreakable connection. "We have him," Hayes announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. He clicked his mouse, zooming in quickly on the red dot. The map magnified the state of Ohio, then the county, and finally the specific town of Oak Haven. Vance leaned over the desk, staring closely at the map. The red dot was not moving. It remained completely stationary. "Give me the exact coordinates," Vance ordered. Hayes overlaid the GPS data with a local zoning map. "The signal is coming from a commercial address on the outskirts of Oak Haven. The registry lists the building as a private animal control and boarding facility." Vance processed the information instantly. Luke and Duke never separated voluntarily. If the dog was locked in a cage at a rural pound and Luke's phone was destroyed, the conclusion was obvious. Someone forcefully separated them. "Check the surrounding area," Vance instructed. "Find the nearest law enforcement presence." Hayes manipulated the map again. "The Oak Haven Municipal Police Station is located exactly 3 miles away from the animal facility." The picture became crystal clear in the Admiral's mind. Small-town corruption. A rogue police department. They had targeted the wrong man. They had stolen a highly classified military asset and illegally detained a decorated Navy SEAL. Vance stood up straight. His eyes burned with fierce, protective authority. He would not tolerate an attack on his men, domestic or foreign. "Captain," Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy tone. "Contact the regional commander of the United States Marshals Service. Contact the nearest military police battalion. Inform them we have a confirmed hostage situation involving an active-duty special operator and a classified asset." Hayes picked up the secure red phone on the desk. "What are the exact orders, Admiral?" "Authorize a full tactical mobilization," Vance commanded without a single ounce of hesitation. "Put the Black Hawk helicopters in the air. Send the armored transport vehicles. I want that town locked down and surrounded within the hour. We are going to Oak Haven. We are bringing our boy home." Inside the Oak Haven police station, the heavy air conditioning unit continued to rattle. Sergeant Briggs sat behind his cluttered metal desk, grinning widely. He tapped a cheap plastic pen against a stack of official impound release forms. Sitting across from him was Marcus. Marcus was a large, unkempt man in his late 40s with a thick gray beard and a faded leather jacket. He made his living buying stolen property and illegal animals. He carried a thick canvas bag filled with dirty, unbanded cash. "The dog is locked up tight at the county facility," Briggs said, sliding the falsified paperwork across the desk. "He is exactly what I promised over the phone. Purebred, huge, trained better than any police dog in this state." Marcus picked up the paper and examined it with narrowed eyes. He reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a thick stack of $20 bills. He tossed the money onto the center of the desk. $3,000, Marcus grunted. "Just like we agreed. I have a buyer lined up in Texas who wants a guard dog for his private compound. I am picking the animal up in 10 minutes. Briggs reached for the cash. Officer Miller stood near the doorway, watching the exchange with greedy, nervous energy. They had successfully robbed a drifter of $5,000, and now they were making another $3,000 on the dog. It was the most profitable morning in the history of their corrupt careers. Briggs licked his thumb and started counting the dirty bills. He did not get past the third 20. A low, rhythmic vibration started deep in the concrete floor. At first, Briggs thought it was a heavy freight truck driving down the nearby highway, but the vibration grew rapidly stronger. The cheap fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling began to flicker and sway. A loose coffee mug on Miller's desk vibrated toward the edge and shattered on the floor. "What is that noise?" Marcus asked, standing up quickly. The vibration turned into a deafening roar. It sounded like a hurricane tearing through the center of the quiet town. The heavy glass windows of the police station rattled violently against their metal frames. The sound of massive rotor blades chopping through the humid air completely drowned out the rattling air conditioning unit. Officer Miller ran to the front window and peered through the dirty blinds. His jaw dropped. His face turned completely pale. "Sergeant," Miller stammered, stepping backward. "You need to see this." Briggs shoved the illegal cash into his desk drawer and walked to the window. He looked up at the gray sky. A massive, matte black Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter hovered less than 200 feet above the police station. It had no police markings. It bore the bold white insignia of the United States military. The powerful downdraft from the rotors whipped the dust and garbage of Oakhaven into a blinding tornado. "What is the military doing here?" Briggs yelled over the deafening noise. Before he could process the situation, the ground assault arrived. 3 heavy military Humvees, painted in dark urban camouflage, tore around the corner of the street. Their massive off-road tires crushed the cracked pavement. They skidded to a halt in a precise tactical formation, completely blocking the front entrance of the police station. 2 unmarked black-armored SUVs closed off the rear exit in the alleyway. The entire building was surrounded in less than 10 seconds. The doors of the vehicles burst open simultaneously. Over 24 heavily armed operatives poured into the street. They moved with terrifying, silent precision. Some wore the dark olive gear of military police units. Others wore the tactical black uniforms of the United States Marshals Service. They carried compact assault rifles, heavy breaching tools, and ballistic shields. "They are surrounding the building!" Miller screamed in absolute panic. He instinctively reached for his holstered weapon. "Do not touch your gun, you idiot," Briggs shouted, slapping Miller's hand away. "Those are federal agents." At the front desk, Officer Evans stood up from his computer, his mouth hanging open. He reached slowly for his radio. The heavy glass double doors of the police station exploded inward. A tactical breaching team kicked the doors clean off their hinges. Shards of safety glass rained down on the lobby floor. 6 federal agents flooded the room instantly. Bright red laser sights cut through the dusty air, painting glowing red dots directly on the chests of Evans, Miller, Briggs, and Marcus. "Federal agents, do not move! Hands in the air right now!" the lead tactical operator roared. His voice overpowered the sound of the helicopter outside. Evans immediately raised his hands and dropped to his knees, crying softly. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, holding his hands high in the air, cursing under his breath. Briggs stood frozen. His mind could not comprehend the reality unfolding before him. He slowly raised his arms. 2 heavily armored marshals rushed forward. They grabbed Briggs by the shoulders, kicked his legs apart, and slammed him face first into the concrete wall. They disarmed him instantly, pulling his pistol from its holster and throwing it across the room. Cold, heavy steel handcuffs snapped around his wrists, ratcheting tight. They did the exact same thing to Miller, pinning the young officer to the floor. "The building is secure," an operator spoke into his shoulder microphone. The deafening roar of the helicopter began to fade as the pilot moved the aircraft to a holding pattern higher in the sky. The chaotic lobby fell into a sudden, tense silence. The shattered doorway darkened as a new figure stepped into the station. It was Captain Hayes. He wore his pristine dark blue Navy uniform. His black shoes crunched softly on the broken glass. He carried a leather folder in his left hand. 2 heavily armed military police officers flanked him, their rifles held at the low-ready position. Hayes walked slowly to the center of the room. He looked at Evans, cowering on the floor. He looked at the stolen cash scattered on the desk. Finally, his cold eyes settled on Sergeant Briggs, who was still pinned against the wall by a federal agent. "Who is in charge of this facility?" Captain Hayes asked. His voice was calm, but it carried the lethal weight of absolute authority. "I am Sergeant Briggs." Briggs gasped, his cheek pressed against the rough concrete. "What is the meaning of this? You have no jurisdiction here. We are local police." Captain Hayes opened the leather folder. He pulled out a stack of federal arrest warrants signed by a federal judge just 30 minutes prior. "Sergeant Briggs," Hayes read clearly, "you are under arrest for civil rights violations under color of law, federal kidnapping, armed robbery, and the illegal seizure of classified United States military assets." "Military assets?" Briggs choked out, genuine confusion mixing with his terror. "I arrested a drifter. He was a vagrant. I took a dog." Captain Hayes stepped closer to Briggs. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that echoed clearly in the silent room. "The man you illegally arrested is an active duty Navy SEAL," Hayes stated coldly. "The dog you stole is a highly classified military tracking asset, and the commander of the United States Armed Forces wants his soldier back immediately." All the color drained from Briggs's face. His arrogant sneer vanished completely. His knees buckled under him as the true, devastating reality of his actions finally crushed his spirit. He had not robbed a nameless drifter. He had provoked the full, terrifying wrath of the United States military. "Where is he?" Hayes demanded. "Cell Block 3. Miller sobbed loudly from the floor. "He is in Cell Block 3. Hayes nodded to the tactical team. "Release the prisoner. Secure this building. Nobody leaves." The heavy iron door of Cell Block 3 clicked loudly. The rusted hinges groaned as a federal tactical agent pulled it open. The agent stepped back and offered a crisp, sharp salute. "The building is secure, sir," the agent said. "You are free to go." Luke stood up from the concrete bench. He did not rush. He walked out of the dim cell and stepped into the main hallway. The oppressive silence of the station was gone, replaced by the sharp, disciplined sounds of military personnel securing the area. Luke entered the main office. The scene had changed completely. Officer Evans sat handcuffed on the floor, weeping quietly. Marcus, the illegal animal dealer, stood pressed against the wall, surrounded by federal marshals. Sergeant Briggs and Officer Miller sat in metal folding chairs, their wrists bound tightly behind their backs. The arrogance had entirely vanished from their faces. They looked small, defeated, and terrified. Captain Hayes stepped forward and extended his hand. Luke shook it firmly. "It is good to see you, Luke," Hayes said. "Admiral Vance sends his regards." "Where is my dog?" Luke asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes locked onto Briggs with a chilling intensity. Briggs flinched, looking away quickly. "We secured the animal control facility 10 minutes ago," Hayes answered. "A transport team is bringing him here right now. We also recovered your personal funds." Hayes gestured to the metal desk. The thick stacks of $100 bills sat neatly banded together, exactly as Luke had packed them. A heavy military transport truck pulled up to the shattered front doors of the station. 2 armed military police officers escorted Gary, the animal control driver, into the lobby. Gary wore handcuffs and looked completely bewildered. Behind him, a tactical operator led Duke through the doors. Duke scanned the chaotic room. His amber eyes locked onto Luke. The massive German shepherd let out a sharp, joyful bark. He pulled against the heavy leash, dragging the tactical operator forward across the broken glass. Luke dropped to one knee. Duke crashed into him, burying his heavy head into Luke's chest. Luke wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, pressing his face into the dark fur. The deep bond between the soldier and his canine partner radiated through the room. Duke whined happily, licking Luke's face and hands. The nightmare was officially over. Luke stood up and looked at Briggs one last time. "You thought you held all the power in this town," Luke said quietly. "You thought you could prey on innocent people traveling through your jurisdiction. You were wrong. And now you will pay for every single person you robbed." Briggs kept his eyes glued to the floor. He had nothing left to say. Federal marshals grabbed Briggs and Miller by their arms and dragged them out of the station. They would face federal prosecution, lengthy prison sentences, and the complete dismantling of their corrupt department. State authorities were already moving in to suspend the local government and launch a full investigation. "We have a schedule to keep," Hayes said, checking his watch. The admiral delayed the ceremony, but the guests are still waiting. We have a transport ready for you." Luke grabbed his canvas duffel bag and his tactical gear. He walked out of the ruined police station with Duke right by his side. The street outside looked like a war zone. Military vehicles blocked every intersection. A Black Hawk helicopter circled high above, keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. A sleek, black armored SUV idled near the curb. 4 state police motorcycles with flashing blue lights waited in front of it, ready to clear the path. Luke and Duke climbed into the spacious back seat of the SUV. The convoy immediately surged forward. The state police motorcycles blasted their sirens, forcing civilian traffic off the highway. They drove at maximum speed, cutting the travel time to Columbus in half. Inside the vehicle, Luke opened his canvas bag. He pulled out his pristine dress uniform. The crisp white fabric, the gleaming gold buttons, and the colorful ribbons stood in stark contrast to the dirt and grime of Oakhaven. He changed quickly, shedding the identity of a helpless drifter and assuming his rightful place as a decorated special operator. The convoy arrived at the Ohio State House. The massive marble building gleamed in the afternoon sun. Armed guards secured the perimeter. Luke walked up the wide stone steps. Duke walked perfectly in step beside him, wearing his heavy tactical collar. They entered the grand rotunda. The massive hall fell completely silent. Hundreds of distinguished guests turned in their wooden chairs to look at the entrance. Politicians, generals, and civilians watched with awe as the Navy SEAL and his military working dog marched down the center aisle. Luke walked with perfect, uncompromising posture. His white uniform remained spotless. His face looked calm and composed. Admiral Vance stood on the stage. A proud smile broke across his weathered face. Luke stopped at the base of the steps, rendered a sharp salute, and walked up to the podium. Duke sat obediently at his feet, facing the crowd with vigilant amber eyes. Admiral Vance stepped forward, holding the velvet box. "Today, we honor a man of extraordinary courage." Vance projected his voice across the silent hall. "Courage is not just found on foreign battlefields amidst gunfire and chaos. True courage is the discipline to hold your fire. It is the patience to endure injustice while trusting the system to correct it. It is the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Vance took the Navy Cross from the box. He pinned the heavy bronze medal onto Luke's chest. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action," Vance read from the official citation. "For unwavering discipline in the face of extreme provocation, and for absolute dedication to his country and his teammates." The entire rotunda erupted into thunderous applause. The guests stood up, offering a standing ovation that echoed off the painted ceiling. Luke looked out at the crowd. He felt the heavy weight of the medal on his chest. He looked down at Duke, who looked back up with unwavering loyalty. The dark shadow of Oakhaven was completely gone, washed away by the bright, enduring light of justice. What a powerful reminder that true strength does not lie in arrogance or the abuse of power. Luke and Duke showed us that real courage is often found in patience, discipline, and the unbreakable bond of loyalty. The corrupt officers in Oakhaven thought they could prey on the vulnerable, but they forgot one crucial truth. Light always exposes the darkness. Justice might be delayed, but it will always arrive for those who stand firm in their integrity. If this story inspired you, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. May God bless you and your loved ones with strength, protection, and unwavering justice in your lives. Please type Amen in the comments if you believe that goodness will always triumph over evil.